Hey friends, have you ever pulled vacuum on a batch of wood, watched it bubble like crazy at first, and then wonder why it suddenly slows down? Or maybe you've heard someone that does high pressure stabilization say, I can pull most of the air out in just a couple hours, and you're thinking, why does mine take so long? This is where sometimes the confusion starts. Because when people hear that, it sometimes creates the impression that high pressure stabilization systems don't use vacuum, when in reality they absolutely do use vacuum. The difference isn't whether vacuum is used, it's how and when it's used. So if you're interested in these type of things, stick with me for a few minutes. So let's start with what most of us already do. You put wood into resin, you pull a vacuum, bubbles come out. Whether you've ever named it before or not, this process is called wet vacuuming, and most ambient pressure, vacuum, soak, work this way because of the equipment they use. But before explaining theory, here's a couple real world examples that most of us will understand. If you've ever gone diving to a pool or a bottom of a lake, you can feel the pressure pushing against your eardrums. As you rise back up, that pressure eases. If you ever watch a diver exhale at depth, the bubbles start small and get larger as they rise. That happens because pressure is higher at depth and lower near the surface. As pressure drops, gas expands. Same thing with opening a pop. The same thing is happening in your stabilization chamber. Now let's talk about what's happening inside the wood. Wood contains air trapped inside the pores, the vessels, and the microscopic voids. When you pull vacuum with wood submerged in the resin, the pressure around the wood drops. The air inside the wood expands. That expanding air escapes as bubbles through the resin. Those bubbles are air leaving the wood and not resin going in. So this follows a law called Boyle's law. And here's an example or a version of that. When pressure goes down on gas, the gas takes up more space as it expands, thus leaving the wood. And when pressure goes up, the gas is compressed into less space. Lower pressure, gas expands. Higher pressure, gas contracts. That expansion is what forces air out of the wood as the lower pressure allows it to expand. Here's what slows things down. Because the wood sometimes is submerged, the weight of the resin above it creates pressure as well. Just like water pressure increases when you dive, and resin pressure increases with depth as well. Simply it's called hydrostatic pressure. The deeper wood sits, for example, the more pressure pushes back against the expanding air inside of it. That's why sometimes bubbling slows down. At first, the easy air comes out fast. Later, the remaining air is deeper and smaller pores, and has to work also against resin viscosity, what we call surface tension, and the liquid pressure. Boyle's law is still working. It's just working against resistance. That's why wet vacuuming at ambient pressure often takes hours, if not days. This is completely normal. Now let's go back to that a couple of hours comment when you talk about high pressure stabilization. When people running high pressure systems say that, it's not that they skip vacuum. It's often because they remove air bubbles before the resin is added. And because of that, the evacuation is much faster. This process is called dry vacuuming. In dry vacuuming, the wood sits in a sealed chamber with no liquids present. There's no viscosity, there's no surface tension, and there's no liquid weight pushing back as it's trying to expand and pull the air out. So vacuum is actually more effective and much faster at removing air. So here's an easy way to picture what happens next. If you were to pull back on a syringe with your finger over the tip, you've created a low pressure space inside of that. Now place the tip under a liquid and remove your finger. The liquid rushes in to fill the empty space very quickly. Dry vacuuming works the same way. Once air is removed, the resin is introduced and moves into the evacuated pores much easily. That's why dry vacuuming is much faster. There's nothing to impede the evacuation of the air. There's no viscosity, there's no liquid, there's no hydrostatic pressure pushing down on it. Because in any other conditions, you have much less physical constraints. So one important note here, I'm not speaking on behalf of any specific system, company, or chamber design. I'm simply explaining the general laws of gas behavior. I would say it's worth considering that extremely tall or deep gas chambers, once you get, from my research, past 20 plus inches, can slightly reduce vacuum effectiveness at the lower levels due to the liquid weight. That doesn't stop the air removal, it just means that it may take more time. So if your process, your process may take a couple more hours, nothing's wrong. You're seeing the same pressure effects that divers experience. Gas is behaving the same way as it always does, and physics, as some people like to quote, is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. I hope you've enjoyed this and that you may understand a little bit more the difference between wet vacuuming and dry vacuuming and the difference. This is your friend, Scotty Nichols. I'll see you at the top.